All right, we're here to talk about Alien Romulus. Nick, I know you thought your tenure at the podcast was coming to an end, but I'm here to tell you that we just added another 12 years onto your term. Let's give hugs. Ladies and gentlemen, a brand new episode of Two Peas on a Podcast, where we review the latest and sometimes greatest movies every week. Gerald is here with you, and over on the other side is the face hugger, Nicholas. How are you, brother?
I'm currently headed into Romulan space to try to figure out if the Federation and the Klingons are going to go to war over this weird alien technology that the Romulans seem to be dipping into. That's our only Star Trek dip for the night. We're not allowed anymore.
You're mixing sci-fi cultures. Watch out.
Ooh.
They will be at us, man. Be careful.
Oh, I just remembered. I'm sorry that the old chest burster Gerald. Shout out Phil Rude, 2023 live stream for The Cure. This is just kind of our yearly annual thing. He's now. I got the shirt too of him doing Gerald up as his favorite, as some of his favorite horror franchises.
Yeah.
So I know I'm making a gag of like cramming every character in every movie we review for the rest of the year into that Windows XP background.
Add like a facehugger or something on the other thing, and we can bring it in next week. And you can.
That's what I'll do. I'm going to just put a facehugger over your face, or no, maybe I'll put it over Shyamalan's face. That's what I'll do because you're still on there for Trap. I'll put a facehugger over Shyamalan. Yeah, but I had to bring in the chest burster Gerald to review Alien Romulus. How's it going, buddy?
I'm good, man. I am. Man, I don't want to bury the lead too early here, but this is probably, you and I have been doing this together for over a year now. This might be, with the exception of maybe, off the top of my head, maybe like Oppenheimer last year, this might be the most excited I am to have a conversation about a movie. Not saying whether I liked it or didn't like it, just to talk about it. And I know that I tend to obviously lean a lot more when it comes to loving horror, and you go the other way, and you don't really like a lot of horror. So I'm interested to see where this movie
time out. Wait,
landed for you as well.
Are you saying you're a horror guy?
I didn't say that. You said it.
Oh, I think there's a sign on your wall that says that, too.
Say, you must be,
I just read the sign, yeah.
You must be reading the fucking sign there. I don't know where you came up with that. No. Look, Fede Alvarez, Alien Romulus, kind of an interquel, which is a thing, as kind of the Rogue One, if you will, of the Alien franchise. It's been placed in the middle of Alien and Aliens. It takes place between those two films, which are often considered largely the two best in the franchise, the first two films, 79 and I believe 86 when Aliens came out. So this one happens right between the middle of those. I'm thrilled to talk. I want to ask real quick before we get into the meat of the episode. What is your relationship, without giving away your thoughts on Romulus, with this franchise? Is it a franchise you love, you hate, you kind of just deal with it because I made you go see it? Where are you at with the Alien films and the franchise in general?
So, first film, masterclass in sci-fi horror. I mean, nobody's ever going to take anything away from that. I absolutely love the original. The original is as good as it gets. The follow-up, Aliens, masterpiece of sci-fi action horror. So they threw in the action element. Cameron took over, and it was great. I've never seen 3, and because everybody for decades, and I find it really weird that like all of a sudden people that we know in the podcasting community have been like coming out and saying how great it is and how much they love it. I've never heard anyone say a kind word about that movie until literally this week. Everybody derides it. Covenant, when we reviewed it back in the day on Epic Film Guys, I referred to it as the prettiest piece of shit I've ever seen. It was a gorgeous movie, but it is terrible. Aside from that, and Covenant was somehow worse. I really, really, really disliked both of those. I had like the weird Fassbender touch and Fassbender.
You mean Resurrection, yeah.
See, I forgot Resurrection. Yeah, Resurrection. I don't remember. It was forgettable. I don't remember anything bad or good about it. It was just a movie I saw.
Where are you at on Prometheus? That's a divisive one.
Yeah, no, Prometheus is the prettiest piece of shit I ever saw.
That's the one you were talking about. Okay.
Yes.
Right. You
wait,
said
did I mix up the titles? I probably mixed up the titles.
Covenant, yeah.
Okay, no, I don't know. Whichever ones. But yeah, so I mean, I would say obviously as far as I'm concerned, this franchise good years left it a very, very long time ago. A lot of people lament that we never got that Neil Blomkamp Alien movie that he wanted
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
And listen, if you've seen Neil Blomkamp's output minus District 9, that's not a bad thing. I saw Elysium, and I don't want to see xenomorphs in Elysium, like that kind of, no, just no.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that for sure.
But
It
here we
was one
go
of those
with
things.
a horror director returning to try to make this scary again. Was that what do you think the goal was of Fede Alvarez making this movie, Gerald? Was it to kind of make this franchise scary again, to bring
I think so.
to make the xenomorph less of a, because the xenomorph over a lot of years has just kind of become not really a threatening movie monster like it once was. Like it used to be, like this thing evoked a lot of terror. Do you think that was his intention?
I think so. And I don't want to give away my opinion quite yet because we're going to do our full blown review tonight. But I am very excited to talk about it. But I do, to generally answer your question, I do think that Fede Alvarez inherently has a knack for the horror centric elements of filmmaking. And Don't Breathe is one of my favorite horror movies of the last 10 years. He did a very similar kind of magic trick with Evil Dead in 2013. He did a remake of that, and it had plenty of callbacks, plenty of fan service, but he also made it his own. It was bloody, it was gory, it was, at the time, 2013, it was lauded as the scariest film you will ever see in the movie, which now, anybody gets put that on the poster. But back then, I mean, it was fucking intense in 2013 to see that movie. I don't know if you ever saw the Evil Dead remake, but
I saw things on Twitter where people were like, there's a scene in this movie that's so disgusting I had to turn away from the screen, or a scene that's like
this or Evil Dead.
This.
Oh, okay.
So I guess we'll talk more about it when we get in there.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the thing. So you were expecting him to bring that kind of touch that he did to Evil Dead, bring that kind of touch to this. I want to pitch the same question back at you because we didn't get your answer on it. And I know you're the horror guy. Yeah. But where are you on the Alien franchise? Are you
Look, man,
still chips in the center of the table, or?
Yeah, I mean, this is an emotional kind of response for me, to be honest, as a horror guy. I don't know if you've heard me tell the story on the old show before. It's come up a couple times, but Alien, the 1979 Alien from Ridley Scott, was the first horror movie that I put my eyes on. I was about 8 years old, and my parents were watching it on VHS tape. They rented it from the local video store, and I peeked through my bedroom door. I could see into the living room from my bedroom. They didn't know I was awake, and I watched probably a good 2/3 of this movie, including the chestburster scene and some other fucking scary shit. And you might see it now and go, whatever, But at 8 years old, when you've never seen anything horror-related, for that to be your introduction, arguably turned me into somewhat of the fan that I am today of that genre, and definitely of sci-fi. So this franchise is extremely important to me, and I've been disappointed from this franchise for probably the last 20 years at least. I mean, there's bits and pieces to all those movies that you mentioned that I do like and I do understand. I mean, they all look great. I mean, they're all beautifully shot and really great to look at, visually stunning. But we were just missing that, kind of what you said, that scariness that came with the first two films. And Cameron kind of interjected the action into the plot, and Sigourney Weaver became this badass, like, renegade final girl heroine in Aliens, which kind of upped it a notch a little bit too, but it still had its horror elements as well. And I was just kind of missing those vibes from this franchise for so long, and I thought that the franchise kind of got away from itself, trying to be more of a lore. It was trying to create a backstory and an arc and a timeline, and it was forgetting about its roots. And when I saw a filmmaker, it was announced a couple years ago that Fede Alvarez was going to be doing this, I was beside myself because, like I said, everything he's done has been really scary. He obviously has a just deep-rooted love and adoration for the horror genre. And in listening to interviews with him and Ridley Scott and other people involved in Romulus, knowing how important that franchise was to him, we're roughly the same age, and how important it was to him to be true to the material too. made me super excited. I mean, to answer your question, I don't know. At least as a horror fan, I'm not going to say as a movie fan overall, but as a horror fan, I don't know if there's a movie more important in my lineage as a horror fan than Alien in 1979. So here we are in 2024, and you'll see what I think about Romulus when we get there. Nick, that was thanks for that introduction, man. I'm excited to talk about this one with you, and we'll see what you thought about Alien Romulus as well when we get there. Before we get there, though, we always like to start out every review by seeing what the fans had to ask us over in one big question.
You gotta ask yourself a question.
I have a lot of questions. Number one, how dare you?
Number one, how dare you?
Hit us with it, man, because I know you were looking up some questions there before we started.
Oh, I love him so much for this question, so I had to ask it. Our very beautiful executive producer, editor, Mr. Daniel says, what horror franchise has gone on for too long and needs to just die at this point? Gerald, as the horror guy, I picked this question because you're the horror guy. I want to know where you stand on this, because I've got my own answer, but I want to wait. We got to hear from the horror guy first. What horror franchise just finally, I know the killers are always unkillable, but for this time we finally got to lop the head off, burn it, send it into the sun, whatever we got to do.
You know, the first thing that popped in my head when you asked me this question is not so much because of the killer, the slasher, the kind of supernatural being so much, but more so, I'm going to go with The Purge. This is a series of films that the first couple films I thought were really, really genuinely scary because they felt so real, especially where we were as a country. And they had the Purge election year, and it was a lot. I mean, you can see that. I mean, it's hard for me to say this, but you can see that kind of shit happening in America. But as the series goes on, it's like, what else can you do with it? Like, we've seen The Purge. You know, we've seen what happens. This is the night that no crime is, you know, you can't be arrested for any crimes. Go crazy. You got 24 hours to kill people or rob or do it. So, like I said, a couple movies, you get away with it. But after that, it's kind of like, where are we going with this story? And I feel like it hasn't really gone anywhere. They tried to put it in the Old West in the last one. And, you know, there's a couple good kills in that movie. But, I mean, it was kind of stupid. So I got to say,
isn't there a
The
TV
Purge.
series based on it now too? Is it in the same continuity or is it a different thing?
Did they do that? I don't know. I haven't.
I don't
seen
know.
It,
I
but
thought they did a TV series on it.
I had heard that they were doing it. I don't know if it actually got released or if it did. I haven't seen any of it. But just that's the kind of movie that frustrates me because, like, I get that it's about money, and we talked about that with Disney last week when we were doing our Spill the Peace segment. But that's the kind of movie that, like, a one shot, The Purge, that one movie, in my opinion, would go down as a horror classic if that was the only one. You know what I mean? Because such a, like, novel, real-world, scary idea. We're talking about producer Dan here, who asked this question. Him and I went to see The Hunt, which was another movie a few years ago, right before COVID hit, where they're hunting people. And it's, like, based on political values. And, like, so Republicans would get into bunkers, and they would basically hunt Democrats. And it was like this thing, and it was going on during kind of the 2020 election year and stuff. So don't do a sequel to The Hunt. Like, that was a brilliant concept. What are you going to keep doing? You know what I mean? You're just kind of regurgitating the same thing over and over again. So for me, my answer would be The Purge. But I'm curious of what you think because you hate horror movies.
So the only horror franchise that I have any sort of slight affinity to is the Saw franchise, and I think most of the audience would probably agree with me that thing needed to end about 17 installments ago. I'm an ardent
Saw X
defender.
wasn't bad. We both kind of dug that, right? I mean, it wasn't the greatest shit ever, but we liked it.
I don't think it was bad. Like, it was a decent enough entry in the franchise, but I think is that more of a knee-jerk kind of reaction to how badly this franchise has flogged us in the past, that we were like, okay, this one's passable quality. They dragged Tobin Bell back, so it's like, okay, this isn't as bad as some of the rest of them. Like, I love the first 4 of them. I mean, 4 is not a great movie, but I love that it takes place concurrently with 3, spoiler alert, for like a 15-20-year-old movie, and everything like that. But then it descends. Once Casas Mandalore shows up, it just descends into absolute
I know. We talked about
ludicrousness.
that forever on our Saw X review.
So
as well.
I mean, I know they're supposed to be Saw. Is it this year or is it next year? I know there's another one coming.
I think it's
because
next
Saw
year.
X did good. So I mean, You know, I mean, they're just going to keep. It's the same thing with any franchise. I know I talked about it last week too, but like as long as people keep going to see them, and especially horror movies, they tend to, for some reason, well, not for some reason. I know exactly the reason. They get no name actors. They get basically nobodies. And they cast them in the film, so their casting budgets are like they don't have that massive cast list of like an MCU movie where you got to have like 40 A-listers in it, where it's like a huge salary or anything like that. So you know they managed to turn that. But yeah, because the problem is Saw wrote itself into a corner when they gave John terminal cancer. Like no matter what, they killed him off in part 3. Like the only thing you can do is keep going back in time to before he died. And keep shoving more stuff in the backstory, or you got to try to again when you try to hand this franchise off to someone else. It doesn't feel right because even though we know he's dead, we still miss John Kramer enough to where we're like, but it's not the same. And then again, the only time they tried to replace him was with Costas Mandylor. And
can I ask you this as a kind of a two-parter on Dan's question? So with the Saw franchise in particular, or really any successful horror franchise, when you get that really, really amazing ending, like we got in the first Saw film with Tobin getting up off the floor of the gas or the rest stop or whatever,
right.
And then you have 10 more movies after that. As a Saw fan, and I'm asking your opinion on this. Does that tarnish that original film for you when it starts to compound all these other installments on top of it? Or does it still hold that, like, that was the greatest shit I ever saw from, like, a plot twist perspective?
I think the frustrating thing about it is it's kind of like we talked about when we watched Trap, right, with Shyamalan. He's kind of become this director that he has to try to include some kind of twist in his movies because that's just what the audience has come to expect on it. It's the same thing with these Saw movies. Like, a lot of them have to have that last twist at the very, very end of them that tries to measure up. And no, I don't think it tarnishes the first film. It's the same way remakes and reboots and all that kind of stuff don't really tarnish, for me, the OG. Like, the original Saw is still an absolute, like, modern horror classic. I really love that film. I love the characters in it, and I love the more psychological kind of nature of it. That's a phenomenal film. Slightly diminishing returns in the next couple ones, but I think the character work is strong enough in the next 2, maybe 3 to really pull them through. And then once you start kind of, the problem with a horror franchise too is you got to cap characters. You're not gonna proceed unless you got a body count, right? So you got to get rid of more and more characters, and the more characters that people are connected to that you get rid of, and then replace them with subpar people. It just kind of that's what leads to the diminishing returns, unfortunately.
Yeah, I get you, guys. Thanks so much for the questions that you threw at us this week, and we chose producer Dan. We don't always do that. So Dan, thank you for the question there, and you know,
we love you, Daddy.
I know he wanted me to say Halloween because he said something about it should have stopped at 0 or something.
He should have stopped at 0. That's what Dan said over on.
You know, that is a very disappointing franchise for me. Very similar to what I was talking about with Alien. You get those first couple movies are amazing, and then it's like
I don't listen. I'm going to say this too. I don't ever want to hear people tell me I hate movies or I don't love movies. You've had Dan on this show. Dan hates everything.
Oh, he hates everything. Yeah, I don't know.
I love movies. I may be critical of them, and I may not like them. In you know, I may criticize some different elements of them. I may not like whatever's more popular to like in different circumstances. But God, I've got to love stuff more than Dan, at least.
You do. You absolutely do. I
say that with
from
love,
Independence Day. I don't even know what he likes.
I do. I love Dan very, very much. One of my best friends in the whole entire world. But
sure.
God.
All right, Dan's movie love aside, let's get into Alien Romulus, man. Now, listeners, before every review, we like to start out that review by giving you our score out of 10, and we have not discussed it with each other yet. It's what we call the early score reveal.
Damn it, this always happens. I think I'm going to score, and then I never score. It's not fair.
Totally professional outfit around here.
Wow. Let's rip the Band-Aid off, buddy. Okay, here we go. 3 out of 10. Alien Romulus.
All right.
3, 2, 1. I'm waiting for you to go first.
I knew it.
You son of a bitch.
So that's a 5, ladies and gentlemen, from me. A 9 from Gerald. And this is what I'm gonna put this. I want this on the table from the outset. I want this on the table from the outset. Okay.
Uh-huh.
This is not my kind of movie. And I like I'm gonna do a disservice to this movie because I'm not the audience for it. Like point blank, period. This would be like if we were reviewing episodes of Blue's Clues on the podcast or something. All right, like I'm not the audience for it. Okay, so it like none of this is designed to play for me. Like if there was a horror fan, I'm gonna say very general thoughts. Like not even talking about the film itself, but like. I think if you're a fan of this franchise, and I think if you're a fan of like the Xenomorph and this kind of stuff, I think you're going to be a lot more invested in this than someone like me who is not a horror guy. Like horror just does not get me. Like it does not get the tingles going up my spine and get me excited in the way that it does with Gerald. So I want to just caveat I just don't enjoy this kind of movie, and that's part of my score. Like, I'm sure if I did love horror the way that Gerald does, I probably would be rating it a lot higher. But Gerald, I don't want to talk a lot about this movie. I want you to talk a lot about this movie and why you gave it a 9 out of 10. That's what I'm so curious about.
Well, that's fair. You giving that little preface there. I was hopeful for you as my co-host, knowing that you don't love a lot of horror, like kind of the spiel you just gave. But I was hopeful because this movie, like I said in the intro, is set in between Alien and Aliens. And what I thought Alvarez and Scott as the producer and the team that worked on this movie, what I thought they did extremely, extremely well, among many other things, obviously giving it a 9, is that they had practical sets. They had a ton of practical effects when it comes to dudes in animatronic suits for the xenomorphs and robot remote-controlled face huggers and all kinds of practical shit. And these sets were actually built. We're not talking about green screens. We're not talking about any of that shit. So it created a really claustrophobic environment that you got in those first two films. And then when you get outside of really Alien 3, which I know you said you didn't see, but really after Alien 3, it's more of an open world. We're out in the open. We're in these different landscapes and we're kind of exploring the terrain and that kind of thing. So it really took it back 30 plus years to where we had been and created this really scary, claustrophobic, haunted house vibe. Now, I'm saying that to say that, yes, I loved that, but I also was really hopeful that you would appreciate it too, because I know you're a fan of the original film, and I thought this film had a lot of the same kind of like feel as those first two movies. Like it kind of felt like it almost took place in the same space.
I would agree. Now, it's been a long time since I've seen the original Alien or Aliens. I'll be honest about that. But I'll agree, aesthetically speaking, like this felt to me like an Alien movie from a production standpoint, from a practical effects standpoint, even like the way all the computer technology and all that kind of stuff worked. Like it was still designed to work and look like computer technology in the 70s, but still almost give like a little bit of a modern upgrade. Like, you had it where like the resolutions weren't like graphics were back in the day, like things like that. I really appreciated that. And I cannot say, I don't think anybody could possibly say a bad word aesthetically about this film. It looks beautiful. It looks absolutely beautiful. I didn't mean to cut you down on that one, but no. I just wanted to jump in and like that's the hardest degree we're ever going to have in the history of this show. This film, like from a production standpoint, I mean, when you're seeing the creatures on the screen, like you're seeing a real like practical effects puppet or animatronic or whatever, and it works like in terms of like looking like a great real effect, and the sets, everything you said is this. I want you to keep going, but I just wanted to agree with you on that, because I mean it looks phenomenal. Like
I agree.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know, I agree, and I'm glad to hear you say that. I think that I get into this trap too when it comes to a franchise like Alien or like Halloween, where like you start factoring in all the different elements of lore and the different tiers of storytelling and how does this movie connect to this movie and what's the next sequel going to be and all this kind of stuff. But like, especially since I started doing the show with you, I try, and I'm not saying I'm always successful at it, but I try to have tunnel vision where I only review what I saw, the movie that I saw. So the 2 hours that I saw this in IMAX on opening weekend. And those 2 hours that I was in the theater were just extraordinary. Like, aside from, and I know you're going to laugh at this, but aside from maybe Dune Part 2, probably the most enjoyable experience I had in the movie theater. because, and we'll get into it with spoilers because I don't want to spoil it. I know Twitter's spoiling everything, but I don't want to be the ones to spoil this for anybody. So we'll let you know when we get into spoilers for Romulus. But there's a ton of callbacks to the franchise, right? A lot of people would refer to that as fan service, which is fine with me because I'm a fan. And I was serviced.
And it doesn't affect me at all because I'm not somebody who's watched all these movies a whole bunch of times to be able to pick out the moments fan service. So I'm just like
right.
All the fan service stuff. Like, if you're here to expect me to criticize it, folks, like, I don't know what any of it is, so I can't tell you.
That's good. I mean, I'll point out a couple to you and see what you think when we get.
Yeah,
there.
I'm going to lean on you hard as my Alien franchise crutch here to tell me all the stuff I missed. Obviously.
Yeah, that's fine. But, you know, they have those elements built into this movie. But, I mean, the last, 20 minutes of this film, fucking bonkers. Like, off the wall, fucking, I'm going to swing for the fences with the biggest bat I have and just fucking go crazy. Now, I know have you seen Don't Breathe or the Evil Dead remake or no?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So Fede Alvarez now this is the third film where he's done this, where he does what I would call a fourth act, where you think the movie's kind of reached a conclusion, all the ends are kind of tied up.
Right.
And honestly, you think the credits are about to start rolling and then something crazy happens for the next 15 or 20 minutes. He did it in Don't Breathe, which I'll just refer to that sequence as the turkey baster sequence. Anyone that's seen that will know what I'm talking about. And then in Evil Dead, he did it with the blood rain sequence in the last 10 to 15 minutes of that movie.
That's not even unfamiliar territory for this franchise, though, because that's how the first film is. Because in the first film, you think that Ripley's going to get away, and then all of a sudden, bam, the xenomorph is back, and then she's got to get it sucked out the airlock.
Yep.
So yeah, this is
It
kind
was
of
a callback in that way too. Yeah, it was a callback in that way too, for sure. But he has a knack for doing that, and we'll get into the fourth act, which is what I'm calling it, and some other stuff as we get on the other side of spoilers. But generally speaking, I'm interested to see why you scored it a 5, unless it's just because this is not your cup of tea. But I guess we can talk about that in spoilers if you want.
That's part of it, but I'm going to say from a very general perspective, especially we've been reviewing movies long enough now for you to know what's my gateway into a film. What do I connect with the most when I watch any film?
Now, see, I'm going to challenge you on that. I know
you
you're talking about characters. I know you're talking about characters.
Yeah, it's definitely characters. So
Andy and Rain had me, dude, from the first first 5 minutes. I'm with Rain and Andy, and they carried me through this movie, caring about. It's kind of weird. Andy is obviously an AI in this film. He's synthetic, and I was honestly worried about him the most. The non-human character, I was really.
That's like a trope in this franchise, right? All the androids are bad in some way or another, or they do something. There's always something in the movie that you're always worried about the android character ever since the first one.
Well, let's tear this thing open, man. Let's bust this thing out of our chest and see what we have to say about Alien Romulus. We're going to run a quick promo break, and then when we come back, guys, be warned, we will be into spoilers for Alien Romulus. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Whoa, welcome back, everybody. We are going to tear down the spoiler wall. All things Alien, Romulus, the Federation, Ambassador Spock, all that kind of stuff. We're going to be getting into all of it. Which captain is your favorite, Captain Ripley or Captain Kirk? We will talk about it all here. Gerald.
Oh, boy.
You gave this movie a 9 out of 10. I did another Star Trek thing, and I said I wasn't going to. Damn it.
I know.
So now that the spoiler wall is down, I mean, again, I'm here to hear you gush about this thing. Nobody wants to hear the non-horror guy talk about why he didn't like the horror movie, okay?
No, I hear you. You were talking about, before we went to that promo break, though, I guess we can I don't want to argue with you tonight. I told myself, and I actually told my wife earlier as well, I said, if fucking Nick comes into this goddamn review with anything less than a 7, he's fired from the show. He's not fucking on the 2Ps anymore. This is one of my absolute favorite movies of the fucking decade. I love this movie so much.
I love you guys so much, audience.
But
it's been real.
No, you have to stay through the end of this one though.
Damn it.
So let's talk about the characters and the performances, okay? Because let me lead with this. All of the Alien films prior to this one we have gotten middle-aged, 30s, 40s, sometimes even older characters. Our main characters established in society. They are in their career, Wayland Yutani, whoever they're working for, but they're, middle-class working folks. In this film, for the first time, at least a core group of individuals are younger. I mean, early 20s, kind of trying to figure out where they fit into this terraform planet that they're on. They come up with an idea for a better life. And we're talking about a planet that the sun never shines. It's dark 24 hours a day. They have this kind of plan hatched to work together to get to a better planet where the sun does rise. And we all feel that, right? Like the hope for a better life. What can we do to advance our position in society? And these are young folks that are going to, of course, bring in a younger generation to the Alien franchise, not old fogies like me and you that have been around since Aliens came out and everything else. So I like that aspect of it, but I also like that new twist on kind of the characters that we're quote-unquote rooting for and following in these stories, which this is a new-looking group. We've never gotten this kind of group of characters before in the Alien films.
Right.
And I like that. Kaylee Spaney, we've talked about her on the show before. I fucking love her, dude. She was in Civil War this year. I thought she was one of the best parts of that film, a very quiet, subtle, kind of tortured performance. And there's a very similar performance here. She played Priscilla Presley last year, which I also really liked in the Sofia Coppola film. I mean, I think I told you when we talked about Civil War, she is on her way, bro. Like, she's going to be an A-list. I'm having trouble of who even maybe to compare her to, like ScarJo or Sandra Bullock, or like, I mean, she's going to be like A-list, like a career actress, in my opinion.
Right.
And we're seeing it kind of happen before our eyes, which is kind of exciting. And then David Johnson, who plays Andy in this film, I want to hear what you have to say, but he fucking blew me away in this movie, dude. Like, he's playing an android who is kind of dim-witted, almost kind of autistic in a way, and he's just telling dad jokes and kind of roaming around and following Rain around. And then, as the plot develops, he gets this other chip implanted in him, and he gains all this intelligence and wisdom, and that's the same actor doing these different kind of portrayals of that Andy character, and I was just floored by his performance. And the two of them together, and then I want to pitch it to you, but Rain and Andy and the two of them together, and how we see that they just want a better life and they just want to get off of this dark planet, and the lengths that they will go to do that, I connected to that. Like, that was all I needed from like a character connection piece. The side characters were expendable, and I know you're probably going to say that too. I mean, they're just part of the body count. You could kind of tell that in the beginning. But those two characters carried it enough for me to where it wasn't a shortcoming for me. And I know that you are big on the character piece, so go ahead and talk about why that did not work for you, which I assume it didn't.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you in terms of the performance from either David Johnson or Kaylee Spaney. I think they're both great. I think they both give really good performances in the film. I don't feel like, see, you bought into them from the second, and I didn't not buy it. Like, I got what they were trying to do in the film, but I really wanted to spend more time with these characters, especially now. You talked about the cannon fodder characters. There is nothing, and I mean literally nothing at all on the page for these actors to do. Unfortunately, they are just extremely stereotypical. Like, one dude is just like the angry dude with a chip on his shoulder.
You're right.
You got the brother and sister, and then you've got like the rando pilot, and like none of those characters are fleshed out whatsoever. And I feel like that's a disservice in a franchise like this, where one of the reasons why the original film is so good, and one of the reasons why Cameron's Aliens is so good, is even though there's a bunch of cannon fodder in it, you still connect to them at least a little bit. Like, you still get to know them at least a little bit. Like, Spike Farron's character, Bjorn, is just a jack-off from the second you meet him. And he's a jack-off up until he gets melted with acid. And, like, I mean, I know those are supposed to be, like, the rah-rah pump-your-fist moments. Like, we're kind of glad he gets capped by the xenomorph, although he doesn't really get capped, necessarily. He gets more... That was an awesome, by the way, that was not a death, like a kill in this franchise that we had seen with the acid blood. That. I thought that was really cool, the way they killed him off. Yeah, like, I mean, the relationship, the main character relationship in this, however, is the main connection between Rain and Andy. Like you said, David Johnson given 2 different performances in the film, basically when he gets the chip installed from none other than Ian Holm, which we got to talk about that too, because I got to find out how well that did or maybe didn't work for you. I think a lot of the reason why people are given the Rogue One illusions is obviously because of what they did in that film too with, God, what's the guy that plays Tarkin's name? Now I can't even remember, and I feel bad.
I know who
about
you're
it.
talking about too, but I can't remember either.
Yeah, I can't remember the actor's name, unfortunately. But like, you know, they're resurrecting him from the dead and stretching the CGI face over him, and they did the same thing with Ian Holm in this movie. Although he's not playing, he was Bishop in the first one, right?
So he was Ash. And,
Ash, okay, that's right. Yeah, Bishop's the second movie. Bishop, yeah, because it's like ABC. It like follows that naming convention. That's right.
My understanding is that in this film he's Rook, and
he's Rook. Yeah.
Rook is the same model that Ash was, but
Right.
on this ship. So it's the same android, essentially, which is why they look the same.
Right.
And have a lot of the same capabilities in terms of their knowledge and stuff. Let me just touch on that real quick, and obviously we're into spoilers, so hopefully you guys got that warning. But Ian Holm, rest in peace, he passed away in 2020. Just a phenomenal actor, a phenomenal presence in Hollywood, did a lot of great B movies too, which, I mean, he's just a very memorable guy when he shows up in movies. It's weird, Nick. So when I saw that, I'm absolutely in love with Alien Romulus. I'm in IMAX. I'm digging the experience. Everything's fucking great. They pull up this torso that has been disembodied, and we know it's a android because the white blood and everything. And
Peter Cushing is Tarkin.
Yeah.
Tarkin.
Oh,
I
that's
didn't
it.
want
Peter
to
Cushing,
leave that out there. Peter Cushing. Rest in peace.
Yep, Peter Cushing. Yep, I remember that now. And they set him up on the counter to help them, and it's Ian Holm, his face, his likeness, if you will, on the android. At the second that I saw that, it took me out of the movie. For like 10, 15 seconds, I was like, what the fuck is this? And not only that, the CGI was bad in that
CGI was not good.
scene. The CGI was fucking horrible. Now, let me tell you something. And
There's
actually
something, no matter what, it still looks, even it's definitely better than Tarkin was in Rogue One. And better than Carrie Fisher was in Rogue One, but there's still there's still an uncanniness to it. There's still an uncanny thing to it that you just, your brain doesn't click with it. It doesn't
stopped
click
for
on
a second. It
Yeah.
stopped for me for a second because I thought I knew it was an android. I knew whatever. But as soon as I saw his face, I was like, whoa, hang on a second. So it did take me out briefly. And I had to kind of bring myself back. In fact, that's probably why this movie's not a 10 out of 10. I mean, honestly, the Ian Holm inclusion and how it affected me during the viewing, and the fact that the CGI was sucked when the rest of the movie's effects were amazing. It just felt out of place with the rest of the film.
movie was practical. Well, I mean, for the
Right.
most part. I mean, that obviously there's CG like all throughout this movie. Like, I'm not saying it's all free from CG or anything like that. But I mean, like in a movie that's laden with incredible practical effects work, this bad CGI effect of Ian Holm's face stretched over another actor given this performance, it stands out even more.
It does. And let me I want to tell you something. And I actually responded to somebody on Twitter earlier, which I never do, which is how you know I'm defending this film, because I never try to get into it with people or whatever. But I heard an interview with Fede a few days ago, actually, which was after I saw the movie. And the interviewer asked him straight up, like, why did you do that? Why would you, that could have been any android, anybody. It could have been any actor in the world that could have played that android. Why did you do that? So Fede explained that him and Ridley were bouncing around ideas. And Ridley Scott actually said, the only actor from the original 79 film that never reappeared in any of the Alien films was Ian Holm. And I think it was a disservice to Ash and to his impact on this film legacy that he never showed back up, and it's a shame. And so Fede kind of pitched him the idea of doing this scene with Ian Holm as his likeness as the android. Right. And so they called Ian Holm's widow. They talked to her and his children, and the family said, "Oh my God, that's amazing! Like, he loved Alien. He would have absolutely, without even hesitating, been in this film if he were still around.
Right?
We think that's incredible. Please do it. Absolutely." Hearing that and hearing that was the reason to almost pay tribute to this actor from the original film that never got another chance to show up in these movies, was really beautiful, honestly. Now the CGI still sucked. I mean, it's not good CGI,
So, all right.
but hearing that story was, I thought, great. That it was kind of like they kind of thought about this together in a way to kind of honor him and also tie it into the story a little bit.
Well, I love that it was done out of respect for they didn't just do it without permission. Like same thing, that was the same thing with Peter Cushing in Rogue One. They got permission from his family and everything like that to do that as well. I like that they went into it with that kind of noble aim in mind, but here's what doing that immediately does, Gerald. The second you see his face, because what's like the big swerve in the first movie, it's when he like turns on the rest of the crew, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you see that, and I'm somebody who's like I said, I love the first movie, but as soon as I saw his face, I was like, it's going to be like, it sets an expectation for you as an audience member. Like it immediately tunes your mind into that place where you just know that okay, he's not Ash, he's Rook, but he's the same type of robot, and like right from the off, you just have that expectation. It colors the way that you're going to perceive the rest of the film like almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And I dislike it for that reason. I mean, yeah, the CGI is what the CGI is. Like, I mean, we've already talked about that, but I think it's the expectation that colors for an audience member, because it immediately makes me not trust that character. Like, like a good swerve would have been if he was actually like noble somehow, or like a good robot somehow. But it was just, he was basically just Ash again, but just in a different movie as a different version of that character. But he was still just the same old scheming evil Ash, like working for Weyland Yutani, like gotta gotta get these specimens and do all this kind of stuff. It's
whatever's best for the company. Yeah. No, I mean, look, I agree with you, man. I think that the inclusion of Rook in this film, even though I do appreciate the tribute and the homage after hearing that interview especially, is the only thing that took me out of this movie. It was the only thing where I was taken back a little bit. Like, I don't think I like that. The literally only thing in the 2-hour runtime.
Right.
So I also think that's the number one thing that I would have probably changed to, or would have probably been a little more receptive to, if it was just a random android that had the same information or whatever, and it wasn't Ian Holmes' face. But be that as it may, it didn't by any means ruin the film for me. And then hearing kind of some of the reasoning behind it afterwards made it a lot easier for me. I do want to move on a little bit to some of the horror and action set pieces, if you will, in this film. I know you said you want to hear me gush about it, so I'll try to contain myself a little bit, but I fucking loved a lot of what would be considered the horror kind of thriller scenes in this movie. The first one we really get is where they have to raise their body temperature to go through the corridor with all the face huggers to get to the other side, and they're kind of swimming around in the water, and that was a very tense, claustrophobic, horrified scene that if you put yourself in that situation, I mean, how do you not sweat? How do you not, your heartbeat's not supposed to elevate because then your temperature will rise. I mean, it's a very harrowing moment and a very harrowing scene, I thought. We get a lot of stuff later on, too. We mentioned the acid blood that we see, which Bjorn dies from, and the xenomorph is kind of birthed from that cocoon. Prosthetics, man. Practical shit. An actual dude emerging from that suit. How did this kind of horror... Because you're not the horror guy, but I am curious. I'm always curious about that. How did that stuff... Let me ask you this blanket question, then you could spin off of it. Okay. Was this movie scary?
No.
Were you scared? You were not scared in this film?
No.
Okay, go ahead. So what did you like or dislike about the horror elements in the film?
I don't think I disliked them. They just don't really resonate. They don't play for me the way they play for you. I love the effects work. The effects, again, the practical effects work in this film is really, really, really great. I loved, the giant hanging space vagina that, the alien, the cocoon that was birthed out of. And listen, there's been think pieces and thesis statements written about all the phallic and like vaginal,
sure.
like sexual imagery in these films. Like, don't at me, people. It's well known. Look at the
It is what
xenomorph's
it
head,
is.
for God's sake. But like, I really, again, I loved all the practical effects work, but I don't think that it was anything that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Like I said, I think the problem for me, Gerald, is I wasn't really attached to any of these characters, especially the cannon fodder characters. Like Bjorn, from the second you meet him, you're like, please die. Please die. I hate you. Please die.
Sure.
Like, you're the worst character ever. Please die. I really, really wish the film would have taken another 5 minutes even, just exploring the relationship between these characters. Because, like, the plot to me, and the biggest problem that I have with this is the plot is just it's too much of, we got to strap a rocket ship to this script and just get him into xenomorph territory as fast as possible. I don't feel like it takes any time to really develop, like, aside from the most basic need of, he's an android, but it's her brother, or like maybe she just calls him her brother. I don't know. Like, I wasn't ever even sure of, like, if maybe her brother's, like, she had a real brother who was put into the android or something. Like, I thought that at one point. Like, I wasn't sure if that was a thing. I really would have liked to see more of just their relationship together. Why did she want to go to this planet so badly, aside from the fact that she was just living in what is ostensibly a mining colony, I think, and just slaving away, working to get enough hours to be able to leave. Like, why was she in that scenario? Why was she working, trying to get hours? Why is she friends with all these people that just really suck, that are just not, like, cool people? I mean, Kay and Tyler weren't bad characters. I just don't know anything about them. So when they're in any kind of danger, to go back to the horror stuff, I promise I was getting to a point here. To go back to the horror stuff, like, if you want me to care about these characters when they're in danger, I need to care about their characters. Just seeing, like, a scene of something slinking in the background, or hearing a chittering noise off the screen, or like when they're walking through, the great thing, Gerald, about the sequence that you mentioned with the facehuggers, that hallway where they had to raise their temperature and they had to shuffle through, is the stone cold silence that Alvarez plays with in that scene, where it's just them just very, 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 very quietly moving through. But then it descended a little bit into a little bit of hokiness with, let me preface this the right way. I feel like this movie, and granted, it's been a while since I've seen any of the other movies in this series that I disliked, but I feel like this movie, all of these creatures had the greatest sense of dramatic timing. Like, no matter what, like, they were all just the greatest at it, because all of a sudden the radio starts going off and it's his sister on the other side of the radio trying to get the airlock open because this xenomorph is being born behind her, and she's trying to escape from the ship that they crashed in, and trying to get out of there and do all this different stuff. And like the face huggers, like, it just like, it takes too long. Like, here's the thing for me, it's like, you can't make any noise, you can't raise your body temperature, you can't perspire, you can't do any of these kinds of things, because then we're screwed. I feel like that scene takes too long. It, like, the horror elements of it are good at first, and I really love, like I said, like, the stone cold silence, like, trying to walk through that scene and how harrowing that must be, and how you got to try not to panic in that scene. Like you said, there'd be a trail of Hershey squirts from from one entrance to the other. I hope those things can't smell, because
exactly.
But, like, I mean, I'd be terrified. But then, like I said, like, it kind of got a little hokey to me, where it was just like, they're on the radio and then they're whispering and having a whole conversation, and I'm just like, if these things can't see, just judging by the logic of other Earth-based organisms, and judging by the fact that these are supposed to be the perfect organism, Michael Fassbender made them that way now. Like, they're supposed to be the perfect, like, surely they would have super sensitive other senses that would have been able, like, they're going to hear a pin drop. They're going to hear so much better. They're going to be able to sense that temperature fluctuation, even if it's more slight. Their other senses are going to be heightened. It just got hokey to me, because the scene just dragged on and on and on and on while they're talking and doing all this different stuff. And, like, I mean, it would have been better for me if the scene goes on and the scene goes on, but then all of a sudden a face hugger hears something and makes that leap, and then they've got to burst out of there running. Like the face huggers were kind enough to wait until the dramatic tension of the scene got to a point where Andy turned around and said run before they started jumping at and attacking the characters. And there's other instances I have of that same kind of thing in this movie where the creatures just, they, first of all, plot armor is a huge thing. Kaylee Spaney's wearing loads and loads of plot armor in this thing. The xenomorphs behave completely differently compared, like when they're going after Rain, than they do any other character. Any other character is just straight up like bump, dead, or kidnapped or captured or implant, whatever. Kaylee Spaney, they're like, you know, like they're like playing with her and toying with her, because it's just, I mean, I'm sorry, like, this is what I'm going to say about this. Is one of the things that really soured me on this. Like, as I started thinking about it, like I had to go to grocery store and buy groceries. I'm thinking about it. Like, xenomorphs are cartoon characters at this point, dude. They're not scary anymore. They're just not. They were a long time ago, and I get, like, Alvarez wanted to. And I think in some of the quieter moments when he thinks back to Ridley Scott's Alien and they're in the shadows and you only see shots of just the mouth, the teeth, and the petroleum jelly or KY jelly or whatever it is. I forget what it is. I think it's KY jelly that they had like dripping from them and stuff. Like, they're really scary looking. But then, like, dude, like, replay that hallway gunfight scene with like Looney Tunes sound effects. It'd be hilarious. Like, I wanted to start laughing in the theater during that scene. I found that so ridiculous.
Well, I disagree if you're talking about the anti-gravity scene, because I think that's one of the best scenes in the movie. Yeah, I thought that was one of the best scenes in the movie, because she has the premonition to turn the gravity off so that she can actually shoot the pulse rifle, which was a callback to Aliens, the same rifle or very similar rifle. And
isn't there a game called Colonial Marines? Isn't there a game called Aliens Colonial Marines?
I don't know. There's Alien Isolation. I'm not sure about.
I think there's an Alien Colonial Marines game too. I'm not sure. But I know I've heard the term Colonial Marines before. Maybe was that in reference to Aliens? I don't even know.
I don't even know either. The acid blood is floating in the atmosphere, and she's trying to dodge it because obviously it'll kill her. And I love that whole sequence.
But how, answer me this, I've got to ask you this though, how do you make a character, a horror creature, how do you make a horror creature scary if, much like the Bjorn and the Tyler and the Kay in this movie, you throw them at Rain, who's never fired a gun, by the way, so they had to give her literal aimbot on the gun, never fired a gun before, they have to have a scene teaching her how to shoot the aimbot gun. Yeah, literally just like throws cannon fodder xenomorphs at it. Like, they're just getting blown away left, right, center. Like, if they're supposed to be these super awesome killers that are like stalking around and doing all this different stuff, but like, I mean, you can't have them be that and then also treat them as cannon fodder like the next second, you know? Like, it just.
Well, the gravity was off, so they couldn't, charge her. They couldn't attack her.
Well, right.
Yeah, and she was using that to her advantage because the bullets obviously would still, kill them or injure them or whatever. So, but to your point, there has to be, you have to be passive in terms of like accepting that, because you're right, where it's like she doesn't have any training. I mean, she doesn't have even the Ripley level training even.
Right.
So you have to kind of accept that, like, wow, she's kind of a badass bitch out of nowhere, But it was okay for me because I loved the scenery.
I thought she was great in those moments. I really loved her in those moments. Like I said, you take all the wind out of the threat that you're trying to portray that these characters are supposed to be, and then like the same thing, like, okay, so they get to the elevator shaft, they're going up the elevator shaft or whatever, they have the facehuggers pursuing them, they have the xenomorphs pursuing them and everything like that. And then again, like I said, all these creatures have this perfect sense of dramatic timing and stuff like that. She sends Kay off to the ship and is like, no, go get to the ship so we can get out of here, and decides to go back and get her brother. And all the xenomorphs and facehuggers have just disappeared. Like, literally, like, these are supposed to be, like, especially the facehuggers, like, maybe the xenomorphs are trying to be more stealthy or whatever about it, but especially the they're all just gone. They've disappeared completely out of no. I'm just like, where did they go? Like, surely, like, the way that this should have played out is she's like halfway down the elevator and sees a tidal wave of xenomorphs like coming up the elevator at her. Like,
Yeah.
I mean
it's a plot convenience for sure. Yeah.
That's the thing that killed this movie for me. It wasn't the practical effects. It wasn't the performances. All that stuff is great. I think the writing in this film really, really lets it down. And it's like you said, there are too many of those little conveniences for me that just pulled me out of those moments that were supposed to be harrowing or action-packed or exciting or scary or whatever.
Let me ask you about a couple of these other like moments I wanted to talk about. So Eileen Wu, who plays Navarro, is the one that the face hugger latches onto in the first or second act of the film, and essentially they decide to freeze its tail, and remove it from her. But that's where the xenomorph was eventually birthed, and we get another chest burster scene with her and Isabella Merced in that scene. Who plays Kay, who I thought gave one of the best screams I've seen in cinema in quite a while, where she screams at the birth happening and the blood splatters all over her face.
Yep.
Again, largely practical. How did you feel with that chest burster scene up against the infamous one from 1979? And I'm not even going to mention the one on the T-shirt behind you. What do you think?
We all know what one's the best one, right? The one, the one with the beard. I mean, if this chest burster would have popped out with a beard, Fide, I mean, come on, man. It would have been glorious.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. 20 out of 10. I'd be driving to his house right now to deliver like bouquets of flowers and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's not a patch on the original. I mean, William Hurt, laying down and like seeing that like thing like trying to punch its way up out of his stomach and stuff. I'm sorry, I didn't like the whole X-ray hand wavy baton thing that they established earlier, just so they could have the scene of seeing it try to burst its way out from the inside, like breaking one of her ribs and all that kind of stuff. Like I didn't really like that. It was okay. It wasn't. I mean, in terms of all the other stuff in the rest of the film, that was more on the Ian Holm CGI side than it was on the really great xenomorph like animatronics or puppets, or the really great face hugger like robots, or even the set. All the other stuff, it didn't do really anything for me, and it kind of went on too long as a scene. Like, okay. I didn't, again, to go back to characters, I didn't have any attachment to Kay or Navarro. I didn't care about them at all. So I was just like, okay, come on. Like, that's the problem in this film. Like, I felt like there were too many moments where I, as a viewer, was just like, okay, we get it. The chest burster thing's going to come out. Like, come on. Like, of course she's going to be impregnated with the alien. Like, of course the creature did what it did and all that stuff, Okay. I mean, I just wasn't invested in either of their characters, so I was just like, okay,
whatever. So as we get a little further along, so we kind of already talked about the anti-gravity scene, which I thought was great. The elevator shaft scene you mentioned kind of incorporates a lot of the action stuff that Cameron gave us in Aliens, and that's in those scenes, which were not really prominent in the original Aliens. So you get a nice blend of both of the first two movies, I feel like, in the style here. But Kay, Isabella Merced, again, you think the movie's kind of reached a conclusion. Rain kind of saved the day. She's got her brother going into hypersleep or whatever. She's putting Kay into a chamber to let her sleep as they go to this better planet, right? Now I want to get into this, what I call the fourth act of the film, Nick. Right, I want to see what you think about this. So there's like an emergency alert going off in Kay's bunker, and she gets her out, and we have a pretty grotesque, pretty, again, practical, bloody birthing scene. The Alien films have always been kind of known for their, like, mothering and motherhood and birthing kind of overtones in the film, and we get a lot more of that in this movie as well. It's hilarious to me, by the way, that we've got like 10 films or whatever, and there's never been a female director, and it's all about motherhood and birth. But Fede Alvarez is a dude, so we have another one of these scenes here. Horror, body horror, I thought it was phenomenal. We get this egg filled with acid blood or whatever, and it starts to kind of melt, and we see Rain's going to destroy it, and then she sees a human face, the face of a human baby. That eventually becomes much more. It becomes like a humanoid alien creature that has like the face of a human, kind of the body of an engineer from Prometheus. It's got a little bit of xenomorph mixed into it. So it's definitely a hybrid of a lot of different things that we've seen in this franchise. And in my opinion, was quite terrifying. When I look at a lot of things in this movie, and I know you've been more critical of them than I have, but when I look at a lot of the horror things in this movie, I am placing myself in the characters that were witnessing these. And if Rain is basically by herself at this point on this spacecraft, and she's seeing this fucking Slender Man alien 9-foot tall fucking creature, you know, sucking her friend's boob and then trying to like fucking kill. I mean, it's a terrifying experience, I would think, for that person. And that's where I get a lot of the fear from these types of scenes. But Fede Alvarez went fucking nuts in the last 20 minutes of this movie. I mean, this was just crazy. And I'm just sitting there going, man, this guy is, I love this dude. I mean, the fact that he got the studio to let him do it, he got Ridley Scott to let him do it. I mean, there's obviously nods to Prometheus and other things in the series, and there could be some continuity there, but at the same time, you can look at it and go, he was just having fun. Like, he was just doing what he could in this franchise that hadn't really been seen yet before. I'm curious to how this last 20 minutes played for you.
Well, you forgot to mention, so this is why the whole fourth act thing, I don't really feel like it was a fourth act, quote unquote, like you do, only because they introduced Chekhov's fluid injection, or, you know, Chekhov's gun. Like, as soon as they introduce this super fluid that's supposed to make humans into the perfect whatever, you know somebody's getting injected with it. You know it's happening no matter what. And then as soon as they find out that Kay is alive, like, immediately I'm plotting the rest of this film in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, she getting shot up with that.
Oh, okay.
She's going to turn into some kind of weird, crazy xenomorph hybrid thing. That's not uncommon territory for this franchise either. We saw it in Resurrection with that, like, albino alien-ish baby thing and all these different. So it's fertile ground. And I mean, you mentioned the birthing sequence. I mean, just call back to that phenomenal C-section sequence that happens in Prometheus, which was, no matter your feelings about that film aside, some of the best filmmaking of that decade, probably just that sequence, that scene, you know. So for me, like, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting. Like, I didn't expect that this movie was over, because I still knew that Kay. And here's the thing that I dislike about the final 20 minutes, Gerald. I hate that they showed the scene of Kay injecting the stuff almost immediately out, because Rain gives her the canister and she says, "Get to the ship and use the autopilot. It'll take you somewhere safe." And then she starts climbing back down to go get her brother. And then it cuts to a scene of Kay injecting herself with the fluid. I thought that would have played so much better if they didn't show that scene, and then we get to the ship, and then all that whole sequence of events happens. She takes Kay, she puts her in the cryopod, and then all of a sudden it starts malfunctioning, and then you pull the cryopod drawer open, and then you see maybe the empty fluid needle there. And then you find out that she injected herself then I would be like, whoa, surprise fourth act. I knew, like, you just felt it was coming, because they almost immediately, like I said, it's Chekhov's gun, but they almost immediately shoot someone with it. Like, almost immediately, and you know, they get to the ship.
You knew something had to come from it.
Something had to come from it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you get to the thing, and you're just like, et cetera, and I mean, the face of that thing was definitely an engineer from Prometheus. Go back and watch, like, the engineer sequences in Prometheus, like even the creation sequence, like at the beginning, 100% in the face. You know, I mean, it was fine. It was fine. I don't know that the film needed it necessarily. Like, to me, and again, I mentioned earlier that I wasn't really going to know about where all the callbacks and Easter eggs and all that stuff was, but I was just like, I know this franchise has done like this weird hybrid stuff before. Like it was in Prometheus, it was in Resurrection, it was in Alien 3. Even though I've never watched it, but I know, isn't there a dog alien in that one or something?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's like, for me, it was just like, I don't think the film needed it. I would have much rather, if it was gonna pay homage to the first film in all the ways that it did, and a lot of them great, at least from what I remember, in terms of like just the horror of not seeing the creature immediately and just hearing it and just seeing like a tail slink by in the corner of a shot, and the shadows, the darkness, and all those kinds of different things. I think if you want to call back to the first film, just have it be a xenomorph. Just have it be one of the xenomorphs that, I get it, it needed to be the red herring to get you to the MacGuffin, I guess, not the red herring. It was the actual thing. Like, you needed the MacGuffin of the shot because Bishop's character, or Ash's character, Rook's character, whoever he is, he's like, no, like, I won't activate the autopilot unless you have this canister or whatever when you get there and everything. Like, I get that they thought it was like this plot element that they needed to be like, how else are we going to get them off of the thing? But it was also, I'm curious to know what you know about this, and I know we're getting long in the tooth on this one probably, but how much control do these AI characters, or these artificial cyborg characters, whatever they are, how much control do they have over like the computer systems and everything in the ship? Because at times, like, it feels like if he wanted to stop them, it feels like, well, I guess he didn't want to stop him. I guess he wanted to get this fluid off of the station because it was his baby that he made or whatever.
Right.
But like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
think I don't recall, but I don't think they have any like direct like control over it. I mean, Mother is the system that, is kind of running the ship, the computer
I don't know.
system, which also runs them.
I don't think it was it didn't do anything to improve or lower my score. My score was pretty firmly entrenched at that point from where it was. I feel like if I enjoyed those horror elements just as horror elements more, then I would have enjoyed the film a lot more, like you did. And since those didn't play for me, I was kind of just left looking at all the other. And like I said, I don't think the script for this film does it any favors. I don't think it does.
All right. Well, we can wrap up on Alien Romulus. To wrap up for me, I loved it. I thought it was an amazing blend of the kind of the horror roots of this franchise, while also still kind of paying homage to different elements of the franchise that, some I didn't even like. Other movies that like Resurrection and other ones that I wasn't really a huge fan of. You saw different kind of nods to those films, and there were some questionable things in the movie that probably would have made it even better for me had they not been there. But at the end of the day, I said this on Twitter when it came out, this is the best horror movie of the year as it stands right now for me. If we're saying this is a horror movie, this is my number one. It's better than Immaculate, which I had very highly on my list too, starring Sydney Sweeney, but this one's up there. So I think Fede Alvarez took this very well-known, very beloved franchise and made it scary again, made it kind of unique, and or at least as far as I'm concerned, he made it very unpredictable. He did the same thing with Evil Dead in 2013. It was a lot of callbacks, a lot of nods, a lot of familiarities, but at the same time, it was new, it was scary, it was gross. And he really did a lot of similar things here. I love the set design, the cinematography. I hope there's some Oscar love for this movie when that comes around, because horror is rarely identified in that realm. But I mean, just the effects, and the production design alone, and just
I'd love to see that too. I'd really love to see that too, in terms of like production design, in terms of the visual effects. I mean, aside from the ropey CGI with Ian Holm as Rook, I think that this film is so it's the same way that Covenant and Prometheus were before in this franchise. I mean, say what you will about the plots of those movies, but those are beautiful movies, and I think this is right in the vein of that as well. I think even though it's set in a universe that is kind of dark and dingy and not super, it's in the future, but it's not as technologically advanced because they're deliberately kind of designing it in that way. But even in that, like, there's such a beauty in the design and the construction, in the construction of the film and everything like that. Now, one question I wanted to ask you before we leave the movie behind. People are calling this the Rogue One of the Alien franchise. Now, are they saying does this lead directly into Aliens? Because I haven't seen Aliens in a long time. So, does this lead directly into Aliens, or is it like they're only calling it Rogue One because it's just takes place between two movies, like that takes place between A New Hope and Empire and whatever. It's not meant to be like the
Romulus,
the setup scene at the very end isn't like the first scene in like the next movie or anything.
It's not like that. Romulus is 20 years after Alien and like 30 years before Aliens. Oh, okay. So it's kind of in the middle of the two, but not like a direct back to back, if you will. But I think the Rogue One comparisons are valid. I think when I think of the Rogue One comparison, I think of it more as I felt very similarly to Rogue One, where I was like, oh shit, this is a great one-off story that fits into this franchise that I kind of have gotten weary of. I've kind of gotten tired of. But it was a breath of fresh air with a lot of very familiar characters. Obviously, Darth Vader comes back. He's fucking doing his thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I felt excited about a lot of the familiarities that I had with Star Wars, but at the same time, it was something new. I mean, new characters and a new story that we had not been told before. Now, I think it's a fair argument to say that the character development in Rogue One is probably a lot stronger than it is in Romulus. We get a lot more time with a lot of the main characters in Rogue One. But
although it also leaves a lot to be desired in Rogue One as well.
Well, that's true. That's true. But I think this was supposed to be like a sci-fi horror. I don't think, and I mentioned that the Rain and Andy connection worked for me, and that was enough for me. But I also see the criticism that you're giving it. But I know that this is just a horror thrill ride, and that's kind of what he was trying to get back to. And it was a nice blend of the first two Alien movies in this movie. And I think as a trilogy, Alien, Romulus, and Aliens would be like a great way to spend 6 hours. I mean, I feel like that would be an amazing trilogy and it would flow really well together. Ending on Cameron's action and starting with the beautiful kind of poetry that we get with Ridley Scott's film, and then this one kind of in the middle. So I'm obviously a bigger fan of it than you are. It's one of my favorite movies of the year so far. It's my number one horror movie of the year so far. 9 out of 10 for me. And what did you give it? You gave it an 8.5, you said? What was it again? Just a little bit less than me, right?
I give it a 5, but all the reasons why you were there for this film and it worked for you, the fact that it was just a horror thrill ride, like you said, like you love all those horror elements to it. There's just something about it where when you watch it, it just makes you giddy. When you like it sets up a fire in you that I can't feel and I can't understand. And for that, like I'm really happy that you loved it as much as you did and that it resonated with you as much as it did. But for that reason, it was never going to connect to me in the same way. Like I said, that's definitely part of my score. But I also just have, I was hoping, and where a lot of horror movies do me right is the writing. The writing will get me there. Like It Chapter 1 was like that for me. I loved like the new one that came out. Like I loved that movie because my God, the writing in that is, I mean, it's obviously King, adapted from King and everything, but the writing and the performances of those kids is so good. Like it just brought me right into it. Like all the horror stuff is all the horror stuff and whatever. But I was hoping that I would be able to connect to this on the levels that I enjoy film, and that would have given me a little bit more for it. But I mean, if you, like I said, if you're a fan of this franchise, don't listen to me. Listen to Gerald. Go see it. I've seen a lot of other fans of this franchise raving about it, like absolutely loving it. You're probably, if you're somebody who loves these movies, you love horror movies, you love acid blood and people getting stabbed and random things getting birthed or like injected into, or just like the visualization of rape and molestation and all those things that you get in this franchise all the time, which really that's what it is.
Bearded dudes popping out of chests,
Yeah, if you love this kind of franchise, if you love this kind of stuff, then Alvarez serves you a buffet here, and you're not gonna go away hungry, man. You're gonna leave full.
Well, look, man, we're gonna do so just to wrap up real quick, a 9 from me, one of my highest rated movies of the year on Alien Romulus, and a 5 from Nick, which puts us at a 7 overall. So I'm bringing the score up. So I'm 7, and I said if we got anything less than a 7, that you were done.
Man,
so you're here.
man,
you're here.
He hoodwinked
So,
me. He loopholed
stick
me
around
into keeping me on the show. Dang it!
You got to stick around now.
I was trying.
We're gonna
guys.
do a we're gonna do a little bit of experiment next week because Nick has never seen the original The Crow from 1992, I believe.
Nope.
94, 92, something like that, early 90s. But we're going to go see the remake starring Bill Skarsgård. You were just talking about It Chapter 1, obviously played Pennywise in those films. So we're going to watch The Crow. Nick's never seen the original. I not only have seen the original, but it's one of my favorite like comic adaptations ever. Very goth, grunge era. Gerald fell in love with that movie at a very important time in my life. So I might wear my black eye makeup next week and talk about The Crow with you. But it's going to be two different perspectives coming in. Do you think it's going to help you or hurt you?
I'm not going to watch the first one either. Like, I'm not going to watch the first one before I see this one now.
No, don't.
I don't want my expectations colored. I just want to go into it blind. And then, because if you're gonna do a remake, maybe it calls back to, like, I mean, a lot of this with Romulus too. Like, if it's gonna connect to it, if it's gonna pay homage to it, that shouldn't stand in the way of making a good movie in its own right, like the remake.
Sure.
So, I mean, we'll see. And we talked about doing the original as a Patreon thing. We can still definitely do that as well. But yeah, I'm firmly now. It's been to this point. We're gonna do it after now, so that way I can reflect on the two. The only thing I know about the first one, aside from the fact that Brandon Lee was tragically killed during the filming of it, is that Cranberries song that's in it. That's the only thing I know about it. I love that song too.
You got a lot to learn.
That's all I know.
Hey, it can't rain all the time.
That better be in the new one, because that's the only thing I'm hoping for. Is that?
All right, man. I love you. Thank you for the chat on Alien Romulus, Nick. Hug my face. I'll see you next week, and we'll talk about The Crow.